Picture yourself in the grocery store, holding 2 jars of pasta sauce. One is on sale, but the other is your favorite. For some reason, picking the pricier one makes your chest tighten a bit. You tell yourself it's about being smart and responsible with money. Still, there's a deeper feeling there, something that goes back further than your last paycheck or your credit score, maybe even further than your own experiences. Most of us learn to see money as a personal matter. We're told it's about discipline, our parents' habits, or whether we grew up with plenty or with less. That's part of the story, but we don't often talk about how much of our money mindset was shaped before we were even born. The financial struggles your grandparents faced left marks on your family's way of thinking, and you still feel those effects when you check your bank account or feel guilty about buying something you want. The story we tell ourselves is that anxiety about money is either rational or it isn't. Either you genuinely can't afford something or you're being neurotic. But that binary misses what's actually happening in your nervous system when you make financial decisions. It misses the fact that your brain doesn't just respond to your current bank balance. It responds to inherited narratives about what money means and what happens when it disappears. There's a concept in psychology called intergenerational transmission of trauma. It started getting serious attention after researchers noticed something strange in the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Even those who grew up in stable, materially comfortable homes often carried a specific kind of hypervigilance. They hoarded resources. They struggled to feel secure no matter how much they had. Transgenerational transmission of trauma in families of Holocaust survivors. The consequences of extreme family functioning on resilience, sense of coherence, anxiety, and depression, 2014, pages 1 through 6. The trauma hadn't been passed down through stories necessarily, because many survivors didn't talk about what happened. It was passed down through behavior, through emotional atmospheres, through tiny moments of parental anxiety that children absorbed before they had language for it. Economic crises worked the same way. The Great Depression didn't just bankrupt a generation, it rewired how entire families would think about security for the next century. People who lived through it developed what we might call survival adaptations: extreme frugality, distrust of banks, the inability to throw anything away because you never know when you might need it. Mintz, 2026. But here's what's important to understand. Those adaptations made perfect sense in 1933. They were intelligent responses to real danger. The problem is that adaptations don't always know when the danger has passed. They get embedded in family culture, in the little lessons parents teach without meaning to, in the emotional weather of a childhood home. If your grandmother hid cash in books and cried when food was wasted, she wasn't being irrational. She was remembering what it felt like when the entire economic system collapsed and savings evaporated overnight. But if you feel an inexplicable panic when your pantry isn't fully stocked, even though you've never missed a meal in your life, you're not being irrational either. You're responding to a signal that was set generations ago and never turned off. Let's talk about what actually happened during these crises, not as history lessons, but as psychological events. The Great Depression wasn't just about unemployment numbers. It was about watching your father, who'd worked his entire adult life, lose everything in a single week and then sit silently at the kitchen table because there was no work to go to. It was about the shame encoded in breadlines, the way economic failure became inseparable from personal failure in the cultural imagination. Middle-class families became homeless. Savings accounts became worthless. The fundamental assumption that hard work equals security was shattered completely. The people who lived through that didn't just learn to be careful with money. They learned that the world could betray you without warning, that stability was an illusion, that you could do everything right and still lose everything. And when they had children, they tried to teach them to be prepared. But what children often absorbed wasn't preparedness, it was fear. Then you have the 1970s stagflation, a different kind of crisis. Not a sudden collapse, but a slow suffocation. Inflation is eating away at purchasing power while wages stagnate and jobs disappear. The psychological impact was different but equally profound. It created a generation that watched their parents work harder and harder while getting further behind. They learned that effort doesn't necessarily correlate with reward. That developed a deep cynicism about financial systems and a bone-deep exhaustion about the prospect of ever getting ahead. The 2008 financial crisis did something else entirely. It revealed that the people in charge, the experts, the institutions we've been told to trust, had built an economy on deliberate fraud. Millions lost their homes, retirement accounts evaporated, and the message absorbed wasn't just that the economy is unstable, it's that it's rigged, that you can follow all the rules and still get crushed by systems designed to benefit people who aren't you. Pause for a moment and think about your own relationship with money. Not the practical details, but the feeling underneath. When you get an unexpected bill, what's the first emotion? When someone suggests you spend money on something non-essential, is there a voice that speaks up? What does it say? Is it your voice, or does it sound like someone else? Think about the money scripts running in the background of your mind. Maybe it's there's never enough. Maybe it's spending on yourself is selfish. Maybe it's you can't trust anything to last. These aren't necessarily thoughts you chose. Often they're conclusions drawn from watching the adults around you navigate their own inherited economics. The German sociologist Max Weber wrote about the Protestant work ethic, the idea that hard work and frugality were moral virtues in themselves, not just practical strategies. But what he was really describing was how economic systems get internalized as ethics, how survival strategies become identity. The danger is when you can't tell the difference anymore, when you think your anxiety about spending money on yourself is a personality trait rather than an adaptation to someone else's trauma. Here's where it gets complicated. Some of these inherited patterns actually serve you. If you grew up in a family that lived through economic collapse, the caution you learned might genuinely help you avoid financial disaster. Being thoughtful about money, living below your means, maintaining an emergency fund, these aren't neuroses. They're intelligent responses to a world where economic stability is never guaranteed. The question is whether the pattern is working for you or against you. There's a difference between healthy financial caution and deprivation anxiety. Healthy caution says, I'm going to save money so I have a buffer if something goes wrong. Deprivation anxiety says, I can never have enough, so I can never relax. Healthy caution allows you to enjoy what you have. Deprivation anxiety makes everything feel like it could be taken away at any moment. The way to tell the difference is to notice how your body feels when you make financial decisions. Does the caution feel empowering, like you're taking care of the future you? Or does it feel like you're trying to prevent a catastrophe that hasn't happened yet and might never happen? Does it create peace, or does it create a constant low-level dread? Research on financial trauma shows that people who experienced or inherited economic crisis psychology have what's called a scarcity mindset. Eldar Shafir found that scarcity doesn't just mean having less, it actually changes how you think. It narrows your focus. It makes you better at managing immediate problems, but worse at long-term planning, because your brain is stuck in survival mode. You're so busy trying to prevent disaster that you can't imagine thriving. The inherited version of this is particularly strange because you can have a scarcity mindset without actual scarcity. You can have money in the bank and still feel like you're one mistake away from ruin. Your rational mind knows you're okay, but your nervous system is responding to a threat that was real for someone else decades ago.
Let's bring this back to that moment in the grocery store. When you feel guilty about buying the pasta sauce you actually want, part of what you're feeling is the accumulated weight of every financial fear your family has carried. Your grandmother's memory of rationing during the war, your parents' anxiety about layoffs and the recession, the cultural narrative that says people who spend money on small pleasures are irresponsible or frivolous. None of this is about whether you should buy the cheaper sauce or not. It's about recognizing that the decision isn't happening in a vacuum. It's about understanding that your relationship with money is archaeological. There are layers, and the deepest layers were formed by events you didn't experience, but that shaped the people who shaped you. The writer James Baldwin said that history is not the past, it's the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history. And this is especially true of economic history, because money is never just money. It's security, it's freedom, it's self-worth, it's survival. When those things were threatened for previous generations, the threat became part of how they understood the world, and they passed that understanding down, often without words, just through the atmosphere of how they lived. Here's what I think matters. You can't change the history you inherited. You can't undo the crises your grandparents lived through or the adaptations your parents developed, but you can become aware of them. You can start to distinguish between fears that belong to your current reality and fears that are echoes from another time. You can learn to ask, is this mine or did someone give this to me? There's a particular kind of freedom that comes from recognizing inherited patterns without judging them. Your family's financial anxiety isn't a weakness. It was intelligence. It was survival. It kept people alive through genuinely dangerous times. But survival mode is supposed to be temporary. It's supposed to turn off when the danger passes. The problem is that no one ever tells your nervous system that it's allowed to relax now. Understanding the history doesn't make the anxiety disappear, but it creates space around it. It lets you see it as a thing that's happening rather than the truth about reality. You can feel the tightness in your chest when you reach for the more expensive pasta sauce and think, oh, there's that old fear, the one that helped great-grandma survive the Depression. I see it. I respect where it came from, and also, I'm going to buy the sauce I actually want, because that fear isn't describing my life right now. That's not overriding your instincts, it's updating them. It's letting your brain learn that the old threat model doesn't apply anymore. And that takes practice, it takes patience, it takes a lot of small moments where you gently teach your nervous system that safety is possible. The deeper truth here is that we're all living in the aftermath of economic trauma, whether we recognize it or not. The systems we navigate were built by crisis and shaped by the fear that comes after. Consumer culture, with its relentless message that you need more, is partly a reaction to generations of deprivation. The wellness industry's obsession with self-sufficiency and resilience is partly about not trusting institutions that have failed us repeatedly. Even the way we talk about retirement and savings is saturated with apocalyptic thinking because we've seen it too many times how quickly security can vanish. This isn't about blame, it's about context. Your anxiety about money isn't a personal failing, it's a reasonable response to inherited information about how the world works. And the first step toward changing your relationship with money isn't discipline or willpower, it's understanding where the relationship came from in the first place. You're allowed to honor the survival strategies your family developed and also recognize that you might need different strategies now. You're allowed to be grateful for the caution you learned and also give yourself permission to relax it when it's safe to do so. You're allowed to carry history without being controlled by it. So, here's what I want you to take from this. Your money mindset isn't just yours. It's a conversation between your current life and several generations of economic trauma. The guilt you feel, the anxiety, the hypervigilance, these aren't character flaws. They're adaptations that made sense once and are still trying to protect you from dangers that may no longer exist in the same way. The work isn't to eliminate these patterns. It's to see them clearly enough that you can choose which ones still serve you and which ones you can gently set down. It's to build a relationship with money that's informed by history, but not imprisoned by it. In the next video, we're going to talk about something related but different, how the individualism embedded in modern economics makes us think financial struggle is always personal failure, and what happens when you start seeing your economic reality as part of a larger system rather than a referendum on your worth. And after that, we'll look at the specific ways childhood messages about money become adult self-sabotage, even when you think you've moved past them. These aren't separate topics, they're different angles on the same question. How do we understand the invisible forces shaping how we live, and what becomes possible when we see them clearly? I'll see you there.